Hey y'all, welcome back. This is going to be part 2 of the Ozarks series. In the last video, we covered the Cassidy Rainwater case, the crime against her, and the unfolding events that led to the arrest of James Phelps and Timothy Norton in Windyville, Missouri. If you missed that video, please go check it out so you're not lost in this one. In this video, we're going to look at the background and the connections between James Phelps, Timothy Norton, and a third man that we are calling John. And you'll see why he is important in a minute. But we're going to start first with the background of James Phelps. James Phelps was born January 13th, 1963 in Preston, Missouri, to Charles Phelps and Mary Frances Rosenstiel Phelps. He has 4 siblings. 3 of them are living. 1 brother, Charles, 1 sister, Robin, and a sister, Carolyn. He grew up in Preston, Missouri on the Phelps family farm, property that he and his brother still own today. Phelps attended Skyline High School in Urbana, where he graduated in 1981. Now, Timothy Norton was born March 31st, 1965, to Betty Norton and Vernon Hansen of Cromwell, Minnesota. But he grew up in Hermitage, Missouri. And during school, Tim and Jim became fast friends, and they stayed close throughout their lives, though Norton eventually switched from Skyline to Hermitage High School, where he graduated in 1983. Both men were good students and made the honor roll. After high school, they both joined the armed forces. Phelps joined the Army, and Norton joined the Marines. Phelps spent some time stationed in South Carolina. Norton went to boot camp in San Diego, California, and then attended the Naval Air Technical Training Center in Millington, Tennessee. But at some point, Norton received a dishonorable discharge. I should have the cause and the date for that, but I do not because I lost the file. I'm going to find that though. But eventually, both men made their way back to Missouri, and both men eventually married. James Phelps married a woman named Beth, and they had 1 daughter. They had been separated for some time by the time of the crime in 2021. They may have been legally divorced, but I'm not sure about that. But Timothy Norton married twice. He first married in 1988 to a 17-year-old senior in high school. Her name was Michelle, and they had 2 children, a son in 1989 and a daughter in 1990. But they divorced in May 1990, shortly after their daughter was born. And then Norton was introduced to his second wife, Laura. And they were introduced by his buddy Phelps. They married around 1999. Laura already had her own daughter, and of course Norton had his 2 children, and then they had 2 children of their own. And documents reveal a hard early life for these children. Timothy Norton was accused of child abuse and neglect of his first 2 children and lost custody. And they were also later removed from their mother's home in 1993 due to unsanitary living conditions. The court records show that, quote, the home had clothes piled up on furniture and floor dirty, dishes piled on the stove, cabinets and in the sink, and packages of meat in the middle of the kitchen floor that had thawed with blood running out. In the children's bedroom, feces was smeared on the wall and impossible to walk because of toys, clothes, food scraps, etc. on the floor. Okay, while that is always gross, having random packages of meat laying in the middle of your kitchen floor seems a little more suspicious in hindsight. Though they never divorced, Norton did have other girlfriends, oftentimes much younger girlfriends, which Laura eventually kicked him out over. In a blog by one investigator who interviewed several close people to Phelps and Norton, including Norton's young girlfriend, Amanda, her best friend, Alexis, and Alexis's fiance, Dalton, who Norton happened to be the step-uncle of. And these 3 actually lived in the cabin for a short period of time. In that blog, Dalton explains that, quote, I was homeless, and Tim agreed to let me live with him. Not long after I moved in, I caught Alexis in bed with Tim at a trailer we were all living at about 3 years ago or so. 3 years ago from 2021, so about 2018. In this interview, Dalton said that the trailer was a dump and almost every inch of it was covered with dog feces. Then he said, quote, Laura went crazy about me finding them in bed, and me, Alexis, and Tim moved out to the cabin for a couple of months around Christmas time. And I'm assuming that this was when Amanda, Alexis's best friend, was introduced to Norton. But as you can probably tell by just this short statement, there was a lot of girlfriend sharing in this little group. A lot of swapping women, but we will circle back to that later. I do want to say here that I do feel that it is important to remember empathy for the children of these men. None of them were given the safe, responsible, loving father that every single child deserves. And they should not be held accountable for the sins of their fathers. Now, some of the spouses, I don't know. But their children and grandchildren are innocents. So James Phelps is known to have lived in Preston, Missouri, St. Louis, and Camdenton before moving to Moon Valley in 2011. Or at least that's the first time his name appears on record there. But his primary residence across most of his life appears to be the Phelps family property in Preston, Missouri, which was owned by his mother until she passed away in 2010. His brother and his wife still reside on the property in Preston, which appears from satellite to be a compound of sorts. There's a few trailers and little buildings scattered on it where different family members live or have lived. Jump scare. I just had to jump on here because I forgot to add into this video information on Phelps and Norton's occupation. So I'm having to film this a couple of days later and just stitch it in there. I actually do not have a lot of information on their occupations, but I do think it's important to reiterate that these were truckers. Phelps was a trucker for several years, and he worked for Prime Trucking in Springfield. Timothy Norton got his CDL in 2020, and he worked for Butler Trucking in Kansas City. And I don't actually know where I'm going to stick this in the video yet, so I may repeat this, but John was also a trucker and worked for Howard Miller Trucking Company. Other than the trucking, I really don't know much about Phelps and Norton's occupations, but it has been questioned whether or not Phelps had some butcher training at some point. He may have been an expert hunter, but that's hard to say. But his skill with processing meat was much more than the average individual. But anyway, just had to jump in and tell you all that. But Norton, he moved around a bit more. He lived in Preston, most likely on the Phelps property, in July 1993, when he was treated at a Springfield hospital after he threw gas on a brush fire and ignited the gas can he was holding. In 1995 DHS documents regarding custody, he was recorded as living on Missouri Avenue in Crystal City, Missouri. And throughout the years, he also used addresses in Hermitage, Camdenton, Tunis, Lynn Creek, Wright City, Farmington, St. Louis, and Poplar Bluff. But what's really interesting is that he first listed his address as 386 Moon Valley in a bad check case in 1992. So Timothy Norton is actually the first recorded occupant of the cabin. The cabin itself was owned and hand-built by this third man, John. It was built slightly outside of the line of the property owned by him and his wife at the time, before she passed away in 2011. And as far as building outside the property line, could that have been accidental? Sure. But in hindsight, it seems more strategic. A game of property lines and muddled addresses can cause quite a delay in the issuing of warrants, a problem that law enforcement actually did encounter in 2021 during the Cassidy Rainwater investigation. And it's also interesting to me that John built this cabin before the property was purchased. Records indicate that property was sold to him and his wife by Edith Franklin in 1995 for $15,000. It's also interesting that when John's wife passed away, that her family had no knowledge of this property. And also no one seems to quite recall exactly when John built it. Most sources simply say early to mid-90s, but for Norton to use it as his address in 1992, well, that pretty well indicates it existed by then. So though we can't pinpoint the exact date, it's safe to say that these three men were active in the Windyville area by the early 90s, at the very least. Now, John is a bit of a mysterious figure. I don't know all that much about his background or his family, and because he was never charged with a crime, and because he is still walking around out there right now, I will not be using his picture in this video. But his tie to Moon Valley seems to be the strongest of the three. He was not only the property owner, but had long been known in the area. And for many years, he worked for a trucking company owned by one of the neighbors. And what's also odd is that John lived in a cabin on this neighbor's property when Phelps lived in a cabin on his. And I think it is also worth noting that the wife of John's boss is very interlinked with the Dallas County Sheriff's Department. I think that's also interesting in light of something that Sheriff Rice said in an interview, which was that him and Phelps had been friends since high school. If you're a criminal, it's kind of handy to have friends in the Sheriff's Department, I suppose. Now, at first glance, the tie between John James Phelps and Timothy Norton appears to be Phelps, because even before the death of John's wife in 2011, he was known to be in a long-term relationship with Phelps's sister, Robin. So John is part of the family, but the tie into Norton as early as 1992 suggests some close tie between them as well. However, given Phelps and Norton's close relationship, in which they often refer to each other and each other's families as brother, cousin, aunt, uncle, it is possible that in a way they've always been interlinked, so much that they all might as well be family, and all three of their lives were definitely very intertwined. Robin is James's older sister. Maybe in some way John has assumed a role as big brother, or maybe it was more like a boss relationship, or a landlord relationship, or maybe a little bit of all the things. Either way, I can safely say it appears that John held some level of authority over the other two. In messages between them, there is a certain air to the way they speak of him, like, "You'll have to talk to John about that," or "John said we have to do so-and-so," or "let me see what John says." So it kind of appears like it was his word that was final. John has significant links to not only Windyville and the Lebanon area, but also Buffalo, Springfield, Hermitage, Leadwood, Herculaneum. Did I say that right? Herculaneum? and Halfway, Missouri. And Halfway, he worked as a farmhand for a big contractor there. And I'm told that while he was in the area, fires had a funny way of popping up. More than one person has told me that they suspect that John is a serial arsonist. And hell, he probably is. Okay, because he has a lot of links to a lot of people. This man is known, but he has some significant links to other criminals, or really I should say predators, who all use the Moon Valley address as their address. Men like Eddie Feck, a convicted pedophile who in 2021 received a 24-year sentence for his crimes against children. He used the cabin as his home address. Another convicted pedophile, Kenneth Smith, also used it as his address. And not only did he share that location with John, he has also shared a P.O. box with him in Buffalo for the past 21 years. I find that very concerning. What in the world could a bunch of pedophiles and murderers need these shared addresses for? And the pedophile theme continues with Timothy Norton, who was well known for preferring young girls. Like the 17-year-old, Amanda, he often bragged about dating before his arrest. And after his arrest, it was reported that he was found in possession of child pornography, something that was oddly never discussed again, and no such charges were ever brought against him for it. Combined with the statements in his interrogation stating that he and Phelps looked for victims online and at Walmart, and the statement that they had a special interest in girls aged 12 to 14, suggests something much larger and more nefarious than just the death of one victim. But back to this cabin in Moon Valley. As mentioned earlier, John hand-built it sometime in the early 90s. And when the cabin was being built, John had some help by his next-door neighbor and friend, Bill Rainwater. And Bill Rainwater is the father of Tracy Wussik, the grandfather of Cassidy Rainwater. Bill Rainwater was born in 1934 in St. Louis, Missouri, but he spent a great deal of his life living in the Moon Valley area, where he lived with his wife, Margaret Campbell Rainwater. They owned a rather large property next to the little sliver of property owned by John. And at one time, I'm told that Bill owned quite a large chunk of Moon Valley. I don't know a great deal about Bill Rainwater, but it's safe to say that he was a rough and tough Ozarkian man. He didn't take no shit, and he handled almost all of his problems himself. Bill and his wife had a home near the river and several outbuildings where I'm told he kept quite the growing of marijuana plants. But if he was involved in any other substances, I'm not aware of it. But it is likely that he and John shared some type of business interests, as it has been said that, allegedly, John was involved with the huge drug bust in Dallas County in 1999. It was the largest meth lab bust in Missouri up to that time, and the location of the lab was found somewhere between Windyville and Buffalo, which is a distance of about 14 miles. But regardless of the exact association between Bill Rainwater and John, they definitely knew each other. And therefore, by proximity, John was also very familiar with Bill's daughter, Tracy, who often visited her father's property to visit the river. In some ways, I believe that John and Tracy may have been friends. And there is a rumor that at one time they may have had some type of romantic relationship with each other. So that would have been many years ago. Now, I suspect, and this is just a suspicion, that much of John and Tracy's association likely comes from the drug world. Like many others in the circle, Tracy carried the burden of addiction on her back. But let's take a minute to properly introduce Tracy. I'm actually very fond of this woman that I have never met and will never have the opportunity to know. But the way people speak about her is beautiful, and I'd like to share some of that with y'all. There was a warmth about Tracy that put people at ease, and she never failed to make other people smile. She's described as the sweetest of women. She loved her animals fiercely and adored the children of her family. She was a doting aunt and let all the kids tag along with her on little adventures and pile up in her old red convertible to explore down the old country gravel roads. She loved to hunt for arrowheads down by the river, one of her favorite hobbies, which she passed down to her own daughter. She had a blanket in a favorite tree near the water, where she could often be found, just hanging out, watching the water. And for every single holiday, both major and minor, she'd decorate the bridge near their house just for the joy of it, and because she loved to see joy in others. While she had her problems, Tracy Wussik was a wonderful woman. And I don't know the dynamic between the Rainwaters and John after Tracy's disappearance in 2007. So I am curious about how they interacted afterwards. And I'd like to know that, because I feel like the interaction between the two of them would be very revealing as to what Bill thought happened to his daughter. I would like to know more about their relationship. So if anybody watching this happens to know and feels comfortable sharing any information with me, really, y'all please email me. So much of this project has been a group effort, and I always welcome any tips or feedback. I'll put my email up on the screen right now. Bill Rainwater passed away on February 29th, 2012. His wife Margaret had already passed away in the year 2000. So for a time, their home sat empty until it also mysteriously caught fire and burned to the ground. I'm assuming the proximity between Bill Rainwater and John is also how Cassidy Rainwater knew these men, and how she became closely associated with James Phelps. While it was widely reported that Cassidy had been kidnapped, and both Phelps and Norton were charged with kidnapping, they didn't abduct Cassidy. She was not forcibly taken. She knew James Phelps very well, and had for a long time. And it's pretty clear that she had some measure of trust in him, which in my opinion makes it even sadder than if he would have just been a stranger. But I received a file of messages between Phelps and Norton that runs from April 2019 until the time of their arrest in 2021. And Cassidy is spoken of several times. The first mention of her occurs on October 29th, 2019, when Phelps told Norton he'd had a visitor the night before, Cassidy, who wanted him to go somewhere and talk. And Norton's reply is interesting. He said it was likely a setup. She may have had friends with her that would have robbed you blind. To which Phelps replied, yes, a good chance of it. Clearly something had gone down between them prior to this. Her wanting to talk, them thinking it could be a setup is a pretty good clue. And there were also a few comments between the men where Norton would ask Phelps if he got the information he was looking for, indicating that Cassidy either knew something they wanted to know or they thought that she did. We see this the next time her name appears on August 6, 2020, when Phelps tells Norton that she had been at the cabin for the last couple of days and she's bringing out the Marcus in him. Phelps, I have Cassidy at the cabin the last couple of days and she is bringing Marcus out of me. Norton, have you gotten your info yet? Phelps, no, and at this point, not worried about it, thinking about making her and the boy disappear. Norton, KK. Phelps, that is how much of him she has pulled out of me. LOL. Norton, wow. Phelps, she has the full assassin out. Norton, sorry for her. Phelps, I was close to doing them both last night. Norton, is she driving you that crazy? Phelps, yes. Norton, whining or just in general? Phelps, Mag and mine, and I have yours out also. Norton, so you have the twins? Phelps, yes, but one cannot be used. Norton, working on taking care of that. Phelps, okay, I may use the other one on them. And Norton says, no body, no crime. And Phelps replies, true. The way they talk about Cassidy and her child, that's who they're talking about, the boy, makes me physically ill. In that message, Phelps is kind of talking like Marcus is his alter ego, the assassin. And he's talking about, which apparently Norton had a hot one, which is also interesting. But let's keep going through these messages, because the conversation between Phelps and Norton over the next few days of August 2020 seems especially dark and murderous, and suspicious in other ways. On August 9th, Phelps asked Norton if he wanted to help butcher Cassidy. Phelps said, you want to help butcher Cass? LOL. And Norton said, meh, do what has to be done. Phelps, LOL. She wants me to pick her up on the way home. Then later that same day, Phelps says he made it home and Norton asked if he got her. Norton, you got her? Phelps, no. I stopped and the boy was there and she wants me to pick them both up in the morning at 9. Norton, KK, so maybe 2 to deal with. LOL. Phelps, yes, I have no problem with that. Norton, do as we need to. Phelps, other half is unknown, so no one will be looking for it. Norton, you have a plan, Marcus? Phelps, she likes bonfires on the yard. Bonfires. That's what he meant. The pit can be seen outside the window over the sink. Norton, fires can be useful. Phelps, don't need a light in the room to see to do a drop. Norton, don't know what happened, heard a scream and she was ablaze, LOL. Phelps continues, she would not go into the fire. Where she sit, then drop him. Norton, sounds like a plan. On August 10th, Phelps asked Norton how things are looking and when he would be back in town from one of his routes. Their conversation is strange and secretive here, but I think it may indicate something that is worth looking further into. Because Phelps said, any chance you would be able to lay over here a day to do what you need to do after you make your drop, we would be better off then. There's a couple of missed calls after that, and then another text from Norton on the 11th, and Norton said back. Phelps said, okay, the time will be tight. I may have to do everything myself. She has to be with her dad starting Wednesday morning for 24 hours. No idea when we'll be back. I need to see if she found a place to go. I may have to do it all by myself. I know you have things. It says thanks. He meant things. I have to run you around for also. Norton said, KK brother. Phelps said, I was hoping you could help with them, but looks like that won't happen. And Norton said, "You know I would." Phelps said, "Yes, I know. Need them taken care of by the weekend." So the statement here that we would be better off and that they need to be taken care of by the weekend, there seems to be some pressure to do something here. So on August 13th, Phelps said, "How's it going?" Norton said, "Waiting to be called in for loading. Did she find you?" Phelps said, "Not yet. I'm thinking she will send me a message tonight to come in and get her." Norton said, "KK." Phelps later says, "I did not reply to her message." Norton says, "Meanie." Phelps says, "I will get you in the morning, then see about her." The two men say goodnight, and then the next day, on August 14th at 8:35 a.m., Phelps says, "What time do you have to head out?" Norton says, "Whenever I decide." Why? Phelps, "Wondering how to handle things is all. I think she is at her dad's place." Please excuse the interruption by the weather outside. Where were we? Phelps, "Wondering how to handle things is all. I think she's at her dad's place where we dropped her. And she said she is wanting to see John. You know how that has been going." Norton said, "A." Phelps said, "My last message from her was at 10:44. Did not say anti? I think he means and, but who really knows? John just getting her." And Norton replied, "Let me know when you're headed this way." At 2:42 that same afternoon, Phelps said, "She is talking to John now." Norton, 2 hours later, said KK. And Phelps says, "Have her at the Preston Diner tomorrow at noon." Norton says KK. I am not sure what I think this conversation is about exactly, but I am certain that it is nothing good. I also think the references to Cassidy wanting to talk to John is notable, especially when Phelps says, "You know how that's been going." And also notice Phelps telling Norton to have her there, who her is, I'm not sure, at the Preston Diner tomorrow at noon. But it makes me wonder, since Norton had just returned from one of his routes. And I'm going to say this. Somebody needs to look into what goes on at the Preston Cafe in Preston, Missouri. I don't want to say too much here because I don't know how much of what I've heard is true. And I don't want to defame a small town business simply on rumor. But there is something significant regarding that location and these three men. And I think someone needs to thoroughly investigate that. But anyways, interestingly, that same day, when there's clearly quite a bit of activity going on regarding Cassidy, he then texts Norton and said, "Somebody burned down the Rainwater house while I was out today." Interesting how that happens, right? Shortly after Cassidy talked to John. I'm just saying, that's weird. And then a few days later, Norton asks an odd question. He asked, "How goes jewelry collecting?" Phelps said, "Not getting it. She is now in Arizona." He meant Arkansas. But Norton said, "How did she get there?" And Phelps said, "She's in Arkansas. I took her yesterday. If she comes back, I will do to her what I was talking about doing, which is kill her." What is the jewelry collecting about? I don't know, but the plot thickens on September 2nd. Phelps said, "Cass sent me a message wanting me to come down where she is to see her. She found one of the rings in her things she has down there." Norton, "Bet she wants you to bring her back." Phelps, "She wants me to bring her up and then take her back down there in the same day while her son is in school." Norton, "Only if she is paying for everything." Phelps, "That would be a 2 to 3 hour round trip in the same day. I think it would be better to get her and bring her here and do to her what we was talking about before." Norton said, "Sounds like a plan." So this is the very odd thing to me about Cassidy's relationship with Phelps. Though he talks constantly about wanting to harm her and clearly has some ulterior motive for wanting to do so, he also goes out of his way to help her, to pick her up or to take her places, even when it goes against his own plans to harm her. But apparently Phelps did not go pick her up that day and take her back or get the jewelry he was looking for, because there's not another word about Cassidy until October 2nd, 2020, when Phelps says, "Cassidy is back." Norton says, "She there with you? And how?" Phelps said, "No, not with me. She is in Lebanon. Not staying at the cabin, but in town." Norton, "How did she get back?" Phelps, "She paid the gas money for me to come get her." Norton said, "Cool. Gonna try to get her out there while I am there?" And Phelps said, "We'll see." There's not a lot else said about her until May 2021, when Phelps mentions that she's supposed to go out there for the night, and the two exchange a few suggestive comments about an outfit she was going to wear. But apparently that night did not go according to plan, because nothing else is said about her until June 6th, when Phelps says, "Cassidy just texted me wanting to know if I can come get her in an hour. after all the shit she pulled the last time she was out here. I'm assuming that she never showed. There's a few more messages in June about Phelps waiting to see if she shows up. While there are some mildly sexual insinuations to him waiting on her visit, there's also a violent one. Because on June 18th, Phelps said, waiting to see if Cass decides to show up this weekend. Norton said, that would be kind of cool. Phelps said, yes, I want her to hang on the hoist outside so bad. And Norton said, I know the feeling, and Phelps said, true. Throughout July, there were quite a few instances of Cassidy showing up and then leaving again and not coming back, and them discussing Norton's work schedule to when it lines up with Cassidy being there. It's pretty clear what they were planning, because on July 23rd, the messages discussing Cassidy's murder appears. Around 5 p.m., Phelps said, do you work tonight? And Norton said, yes. Phelps said, you be able to stop by right after work in the morning? Norton said, I can. What's up? Phelps said, okay, I am free to talk now. I have Cassidy here. She is to spend the night. I am going to see about having her sleep on the floor in the front room tonight, so can get easy access to her in the morning easy. Norton said, KK. Phelps said, can you pop in when you get off? Norton said, yeah, about 8-ish. I will text you when I get off. Phelps said, that should be good. I think she will be out still. Norton said, KK, text if there is any change, and Phelps said, okay, will do. And the next morning, on July 24th, 2021, at 7:06 a.m., Norton said, on my way. Phelps said, okay, she is asleep. How long? And park at the end of the driveway. Norton said 45 minutes to an hour, and Phelps said, okay. And then that's it. Until 5:56 p.m. that evening when Phelps texted Norton, done. And Cassidy was gone. It's really disturbing reading the messages like leading up to the moment. On July 27th, Phelps makes mention in the midst of another conversation that no one had been around looking for it. Norton said, that's good. Phelps said, yes, it is. Last I heard, it was going out of town tomorrow. I noticed throughout this message thread that when they refer to something dead or someone they plan to be dead, they begin to call them it instead of he or she or a person. It makes me a little sick, but moving on. But I will say that I get a little bit of smug enjoyment out of watching Norton text and call Phelps on September 17th with no reply, completely unaware that his BFF had just been arrested and that he was next. I thought it was important for us to go over these messages so that everyone could see for themselves the strange dynamic here. Not only is the publicly available narrative of this crime wrong, Cassidy wasn't kidnapped, and she wasn't held in that cage against her will. She was there voluntarily, and she voluntarily got into the cage, which we can see in another message. But the case becomes increasingly bizarre, even with the truth. They plan to kill Cassidy for over a year. Still, no matter how I look at it, I can't find a motive. They had a friendship of sorts, and even an intimate relationship at times. Why would Phelps want to kill her? There's really only one thing I can think of, and it leads right back to that third person, John. Something was up between John, Phelps, and by association Norton, and the Rainwaters. I don't know what it was, but I know that that link is there. Because here's something that I know for a fact that I perhaps should not. But Cassidy had been quietly helping investigators with the death of her mom, Tracy. At one point, she'd even come in and was ready to talk and tell them everything she knew. But she got spooked when they told her that her statements had to be recorded for evidence. She quickly left after that. And I have reason to believe that either someone found out that she had been communicating with the police, or at least suspected that she had been. We did talk about Tracy's disappearance in the last video. It is its own mystery and is still unsolved. But there is something very wrong about the way it was handled, and the way it is said to have happened, because depending on the person, the story is completely different. According to her longtime boyfriend and his family, there had been a few friends over that night. And at some point, Tracy disappeared, and her boyfriend thought she had wandered off to look for arrowheads like she often did. That when she couldn't be found, he called the police. But that story never really sat right with me either, because who hunts for arrowheads in the dark? I don't know. Maybe they had cool flashlights or something, but I was told by a family member who saw Tracy shortly before she disappeared, like as she was walking out the door of the home with the boyfriend and a couple of their friends. She said that Tracy seemed off and really out of it. Tracy would always acknowledge the children in the room and always said goodbye and that she loved them. And this time she didn't. The last recollection of one of her nieces is haunting. She said, quote, "She seemed so out of it. She didn't even wave to us. She just looked over at us and left." That night, the kids that were there and their parents left shortly after this, so they weren't there the rest of the evening and don't know how everything unfolded. But that side of the family believes that Tracy overdosed and that it was bad police work that led her to not being found for so long. According to them, investigators wouldn't even allow the cadaver dogs into the field across the street where she was eventually found a year later. But according to the investigators, they searched high and low for Tracy, including in the field. And their records indicate that there was a party at her boyfriend's house that night, not just a few friends hanging out. And they suspect something more than an accidental overdose. And Tracy's close kin are of the opinion that it was the boyfriend that had something to do with it. All three stories are very different. And there is something else about Tracy's case that borderlines conspiracy. So much that I don't even feel comfortable fully getting into it in this video. But I can tell you that I have heard from some highly credible sources that there was something very wrong with that investigation. Someone or something was interfering heavily with it, and the investigators found themselves stalked, threatened, and followed by unmarked black SUVs. SUVs that were not associated with the sheriff's department or any law enforcement that they knew of. And they still don't know who it was, which is crazy. But you would not believe how many times I've heard about these SUVs in Moon Valley. It's not just the police or investigators working certain cases that have been followed or chased away by them. But in most people's experiences, they believe the SUVs come from another strange place located in Moon Valley, right down the road from the cabin. It's called the College of Metaphysics, and the more I try to find out about it, the more mysterious it gets. At first glance, I was not concerned with this metaphysical school. I automatically assumed that a lot of these spooky stories and whispers of a cult were likely the knee-jerk habit of associating anything that's not firmly of the Christian faith as something satanic or something evil, but I don't know that I believe that anymore. To be clear, I see absolutely no problem with the field of metaphysics. Metaphysics is defined as the branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, including abstract concepts such as being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. And even that sounds more confusing than it actually is. Most metaphysical practices focus on energy, connection to the earth, and other spiritual concepts commonly associated with the New Age love and light thing, even though the New Age practices all have their roots in much older practices. At a glance, this school doesn't seem particularly cult-like. There's no charismatic leader proclaiming to be God or the next prophet incarnate. I actually had a hard time figuring out who ran the place at all. People can attend briefly and leave easily, and there's no clear signs of abuse or a dangerous power structure. But still, something about it never sat right with me. It still doesn't sit right with me. At first, I thought that was likely due to just simple proximity to the location of the cabin, or even the stories I heard from others. And I'd like to read y'all just a couple of those statements, actually. These are emails or messages that I've received regarding that school. One person said, "When I was in high school, there was a rumor that there was a school in that area of Windyville that did weird experiments on kids. It's supposedly hidden in the woods and hard to find. I never located the school, but my friends and I would drive out there all the time in hopes of finding anything scary. It was definitely creepy, but we never came across anything." Another said, "I live in Lebanon, not too far from there. We hear a lot of stories about the School of Metaphysics in Windyville. My husband had an experience with what we consider a cult from the school. In school, we knew not to go to Windyville because we would get run off by people from that school." Someone else said, "The School of Metaphysics is located in Windyville, and there were talks of cynical things going on at the School of Metaphysics, because honestly, people have no idea what actually goes on there." Someone else said, "I grew up in Lebanon, and there is a School of Metaphysics at Windyville right at Moon Valley. They are a whole cult-style thing. There is a big cave where they do seances and stuff." I've had more than a few strange messages about the School of Metaphysics in the caves, which I still don't truly know the significance of. Like one email I received simply stated, "School of Metaphysics in the cave system. That's all I have the balls to say right now. Good luck." Oh, that kind of creeped me out, I'm not gonna lie. And I don't have some of these messages on hand, but I've also heard several stories about men stopping people traveling down the road, and all of the men would have these crystals around their necks. And they all asked very odd questions. And there are many messages about people talking about these black SUVs pulling out of the school and chasing them out of Moon Valley. But then I began to receive even more detailed tips regarding the school. Now, all of this is alleged, okay? This is just me reading statements, rumors, hearsay, word of mouth. Quote, "I attended the SOM, School of Metaphysics, at their Kansas City campus. My classmate had a friend in the Laclede County Police Department who got wind that the founder of the School of Metaphysics is related to Phelps, but changed his name after his spiritual awakening, which led him to start the cult. My entire class stopped going once we caught wind of what was going on in Windyville, next to the School of Metaphysics College. We were all terrified when we started making the connections that you are now making, and we all went immediately no contact with the organization to protect ourselves. I've actually heard that exact same statement regarding a possible relation between James Phelps and some leader in this school. I cannot confirm it, but I do think that is something we should remember going forward, and if anyone else knows anything about that, email me. I really want to know. And someone else told me this interesting statement that, quote, according to a friend, there is a metaphysical school located in the area, which that's what it's advertised as, but it's really the head site of the Church of Satan in the U.S. They have a lot of property there, and a lot of human sacrifices go on there, and the local police and judges are in on it, and have farms in the area as well. The guys from the Rainwater case also supplied the school with people and meat for rituals. Now that is quite an allegation. I cannot confirm it, but I have been trying to dig into that. I don't have an answer yet, but for now, let's keep that in mind. For me personally, one of the strangest things about this school is just the history of the school. The School of Metaphysics claims itself to be a, quote, 501c3 educational institute. I don't know what the C and the 3 means. It's like in parentheses. Anyway, whose mission is to accelerate the evolution of humanity by teaching teachers who aid any individual to become a whole functioning self. The organization began in 1973, and its first location and its headquarters for the first 10 years was in Springfield, Missouri. By 1981, the School of Metaphysics quietly, even secretly, according to some of the locals who have been there long enough to remember, purchased 700 acres in Moon Valley for the site of their College of Metaphysics and world headquarters. Their first building was completed in 1983, and later they even built a giant peace dome. A giant peace dome for all of their visitors in Windyville population 53. Okay. The school has expanded quite a bit since its creation in the 70s. They have over 16 locations in 9 states, in Missouri, Indiana, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Kentucky, Ohio, and Illinois. And they have multiple branches in Missouri alone, in Springfield, Windyville, Kansas City, Columbia, and Maplewood. And most of these locations, like all of them, except for Windyville, are located smack dab in the middle of a city, which is what you would want for a school, right? Because schools need students. So they want people to be able to find them easily, except apparently their college in Windyville. Their world headquarters that has all this fancy stuff like a giant peace dome and a giant replica pyramid. That they want to hide in the backwoods of Missouri, where even the people that know they are there can't find them. That is extraordinarily odd to me. But according to their website, they wanted a location where they could be one with nature. And it also appears that they believe it sits on a ley line, which is basically a power line of earth energy. Which, cool. Okay. But how much land do you really need to be one with nature? 700 acres is a lot. They now own a huge chunk of Moon Valley. And how exactly does a nonprofit organization come up with that kind of money? Not only do they own all this property and have built structures like a giant peace dome, they've also built something on Moon Valley Road called Moon Valley Ranch, which is listed on Google as an education center. And on the other side of Windyville, along Missouri Road MM, the road to the left of the Windyville Crossroads, is a church associated with the people of the school called Lone Rock Church, which, a lot like Moon Valley Road, has a lot of spooky stories attached to it. And several people, one I talked to, have claimed to see some type of robed figures doing some type of rituals late at night around Lone Rock, which is this rock that sits near this church, and there's some really cool legends associated with it, actually, like that it's a meteor from space and it has healing properties. But either way, though, while I can't say for sure that the School of Metaphysics has anything to do with anything, I really do want to know, like, is it a spiritual school? Is that all it is? Is it a cult? Is it a criminal organization masquerading as a school? I mean, I just don't know, but School of Metaphysics, I'm watching you. I'm on to you, buddy. But regardless of all its arguably suspicious allegations and its obviously suspicious location, there's also a document that's been floating around the interwebs that, if real, puts Phelps' involvement with the school out of the realm of speculation and firmly into a fact. This document appears to be some type of meeting summary, and the attending members list shows some familiar names in attendance. John, along with several Phelps family members, including his sister, his brother, and his brother's wife. But I don't know where this document came from, so I can't say for sure that it is authentic. But I do know that Phelps and Norton both have some occult interests. Phelps claimed to receive visions and would go into the woods to meditate. And I'm told by people who visited the cabin that there was an altar there, and that for several years, in the middle of that altar was a skull. A human skull. Now, what I'm about to say is only speculation, and it's only my speculation, but I do find it strange that there are whispers about this skull on Phelps' altar. And for several years, from 2007 till 2012, that Tracy Wussik's skull was missing and then reappeared in a field that had already been searched. What are the odds of that? I can't say that's a fact, but it does make me wonder if the two things are related. Another thing about these three men, all three of them, is that there is a native factor here. Something I still do not fully understand, but it is well known that John held a position on an Indian council in Springfield and is also the vice president of another native group that I don't know the name of, but I'm told that that group once hosted powwows on the Phelps family farm in Preston, and they even built a giant teepee out there. Giant peace domes, giant teepees, like what is happening out here? I guess what confuses me is that at a glance, all three of these men are white dudes. Like blonde hair, blue-eyed white dudes for the most part, and hey, maybe they do carry some indigenous blood. I have no way of knowing that, but their connection to some sort of indigenous practices is very clear. In many pictures of James Phelps' brother, he's often seen wearing native-style clothing and jewelry. But all of this to say that it does not seem far-fetched to me for any of these three men to be involved with the School of Metaphysics, because that type of belief system seems right up their alley. But despite all of their spiritual practices, there seems to have been quite a bit of criminal activity inside this little cabin. Murder, cannibalism, drugs, child pornography, dark web activity. But as I was told by locals, the cabin may have been a lot like the train station in the TV series Yellowstone. Y'all watch that? If you haven't, I highly recommend. It's quite entertaining. In that TV show, Yellowstone, they would take people to the train station, and people never came back from the train station because it was basically like a cliff. And it seems like the cabin may have been a train station of sorts. A disposal location. Because like Phelps and Norton love to say, no body, no crime. And what better way to get rid of a body than to hand it off to the butcher? Another thing I know for certain that was happening here was the creation of dark web videos. It seems Phelps and Norton were both heavily into the BDSM community. They were also really into torture porn, for a lack of a better word. It is discussed often in their messages. And I know for certain that they were making videos with these girls in their circle. Obviously, I cannot show you all those messages. But it's important to understand that these girls were going along willingly with a lot of this activity. Like, by the messages, it appears that Cassidy went willingly into the cage the night before she died. She posed for the camera. She knew he was recording. It was part of their game, part of their product. So Cassidy was not held in that cage against her will. And when she was ready, Phelps let her out. It was what happened to her next that was against her will. And I'm afraid that this is how they attract many of their victims. They would lure in young women with offers of fun or drugs or making videos for money. Videos that could be sold or streamed on the dark web. And they looked for volunteers for some of their more aggressive ideas. But by the messages, you can also see that they tried their best to lure in women who would not be missed. Women that no one would be looking for. And you can see this very clearly in a message from August 2020 when Phelps asked Norton for his help in picking up a 14-year-old girl who was in a flop house in New Jersey. And Phelps finishes telling Norton about her by saying, quote, "If I can get her here, no one will ever be looking for her." To which Norton says, agreed. This is not to say that I believe that they always looked for victims who would come willingly, because I don't believe that. There were too many other messages implying otherwise, like the one in September 2020 when Norton asked Phelps, "So blonde, brunette, or redhead?" And Phelps said, "One of each. I want a set." And Norton said, "LOL, I figured you would say that." It's easy to assume that they were joking, but I don't think so. because sometimes the conversation about this same kind of thing seemed much more serious. Like on one occasion, Norton said he was in Wyoming, and Phelps said, "Okay, pick me up a girl while you're out there." And Norton said, "LOL, what hair color?" And Phelps said, "Yellow, 18 to 22. Norton said, "We'll see what I can do, but you have to deal with Amanda when she finds out." Phelps said, "No, I don't. She is not for you, but me." And Norton said, "Amanda is beginning to get a bit jealous when I talk about even having another female in the truck. LOL. That indicates to me that Norton did have other females in the truck that was not Amanda. And then there's another message from September 2020 regarding Phelps' own neighbors. Phelps told Norton the place next door sold and have a new neighbor. They have a daughter around 16. I want to make her go poof. Phelps said, "I seen her get off the bus yesterday and she looks sweet." Norton, "You need to get a pic and send it to me. LOL. And Phelps said, "I will try." That makes me want to throw up. Because this also just goes to show how you literally never know who is watching you or your child. You never know when there could be a predator next door watching your daughter. And who says, "I want to make her go poof"? If you've never poofed anyone before, I'm just saying. But it's these messages, these type of messages right here, on top of the plethora of other information, that has me absolutely convinced that there are other victims of Phelps and Norton. I don't care what the authorities say. I don't care what the official story says. After all of this, you cannot convince me that Cassidy Rainwater was the only one. And there may have been two very blatant key pieces of evidence related to two other disappearances, parked right outside the cabin, sitting right under everybody's noses. Outside the cabin, there was an old truck and an old green van. A truck that, according to Norton's girlfriend, once had a large fish decal on the back window, much like the truck described in the missing persons case of Angela Hammond in Clinton, Missouri in 1991. And the green van, with a hand-painted white stripe on the bottom, appears eerily similar to the green van that the police were searching for in connection with the Springfield Three, who disappeared from Springfield, Missouri in 1992. That case may actually be Missouri's most notorious missing persons cold case. But we will talk more about these cases, the Springfield Three and Angie Hammond, and explore other possible connecting cases in the next video. I hope to see y'all next time.